Right now, for a closer look at how Australia's economy is faring, let's cross over to Sydney and bring in Adam Creighton. He's the economics correspondent for The Australian. So, Adam, let's start with your reaction to the RBA's interest rate decision. What's your take?
Well, certainly everyone expected the Reserve Bank to keep rates on hold. The official cash rate has now been at 1.5% for 12 months. And most people don't expect there to be any change there for at least 6 months. The interesting question for the Reserve Bank is whether they try to lift rates to cool the property market. But they're very fearful of that because the Australian dollar has been much stronger than had been forecast earlier in the year. The Australian dollar has increased above 80 cents recently, and that certainly wasn't expected. And the reason that that's largely happened is because Australia's two biggest exports, that is iron ore and coal, the prices of those exports have increased beyond what was expected, and so that's lifted up the Australian dollar. And naturally, though, that complicates the inflation story for the Reserve Bank. It's putting a lid on inflation, which just like in the US, just like in Europe, has been very low. And the Reserve Bank would like to get inflation back to its target of 2 to 3%.
Now, looking regionally within Australia, we're seeing that there's some trouble in the economy in Western Australia. Why is that happening, and what can be done to turn it around?
Yes, certainly Western Australia saw the most spectacular boom from 2010 to 2013 when the iron ore price soared past $100, and there was an enormous amount of construction there. But of course, the construction phase of that boom has now finished, and over the past few years, you've seen house prices in Perth, which is the capital city of Western Australia, and that's also the city that has about 75% or 80% of the state's population. You've seen house prices falling there or going sideways. You've seen the unemployment rate in Perth rise. I mean, just on your question, what the government can do, it's very, very difficult because we have a national government, we have one interest rate, we have one currency for the whole country, just like the United States, where it's very difficult to target programs to particular states. The state government there, the Western Australian government, is just about to bring down its state budget, which is heavily in deficit. And at the moment, there's a massive disagreement between the state government and the federal government over how much goods and services tax the federal government should be giving the state government. There's a complicated formula involved in that decision, but the state government argues that it heavily penalises the state.
Now, looking outside of Australia, we know that the IMF believes that Australia's economy could be aided by others globally. Where do you think that help could potentially come from?
Yeah, well, certainly Australia's been very lucky this year because the Chinese economy has failed to slump. You know, we've certainly seen now for quite a few years, many economists have year after year predicted that something terrible would happen in China and that the growth rate would fall. But we simply haven't seen that. And that is particularly good for Australia because China is both our biggest export and our biggest import partner. And so, you know, we are effectively very much leveraged to the Chinese economy. And so far that's going well. We also have a lot of inward investment from the United States too. They're our biggest financial partner, and we're seeing tentative signs that the US economy is improving, both the employment market and also the financial fundamentals, and so that's going to help Australia as well. The complicating factor is, just as the Reserve Bank said in its statement recently, that if the Australian dollar continues to rise, then that's going to make it harder for our exporters to compete, and especially in the area of education. I mean, our biggest non-resource export now is university education. We have so many foreign students come to Sydney and Melbourne in particular. And of course, if the Australian dollar rises, those courses become much less competitive in a global market.
Now, speaking of the relationship between Australia and China, we know that Australia became a member of the Beijing-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is also going to help fund some of these Belt and Road projects. But Australia still hasn't signed the Memorandum of Understanding regarding the Belt and Road. So where would you say that Australia-Chinese relations stand at the moment?
Well, look, I think that they're very positive, but it's always very difficult for Australia because we have to straddle the Australia-US relationship on one hand and, of course, the Australia-China relationship on the other hand. And as you know, as your viewers know, China and the US, their relationship is sometimes a little fractious. But I think that Australia is very adept at basically keeping both parties on side. As you suggest, we were one of the first countries to sign up to the new infrastructure fund, and we're still negotiating the details with China in terms of what our involvement will be. That hasn't put any strain on our relationship with the Trump administration, which which both our Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull and also Donald Trump have recently said remains in very good health.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us. Adam Creighton, their economics correspondent with The Australian.